It's good to be here. It's good to see lots of lovely faces. And hello to you all. And I'm just going to jump straight in. So, what do you do when the Lord calls you to do something that makes no sense whatsoever? Like Gideon, called to fight against the army of the Midianites. He was the least of the least. He was the least man in the least family, in the least tribe. He really was the least of the least. And God calls him when he's threshing out wheat in fear, hidden away from the Midianites. And he calls him to rise up and fight against Midianites, which is quite challenging in itself. But as that story develops, he then asks him to get rid of most of his army. That doesn't really make a lot of sense in the natural, does it? And personally, I'd want all the arms and armor I could get hold of, along with the book and the instruction guide and the DVD of how to fight the war. But God calls him to get rid of a lot of that natural asset. So what do you do when the Lord calls you to do something that is way beyond your experience or your knowledge or even your culture, church or otherwise? What do you do when the Lord is saying one thing, but everyone else says another, or the world says another? And what do you do when you look at your life and you think, well, this doesn't make a lot of sense? What do you do when the plan gets ripped from your hands by the wind, and when you lose hope, when you can't be bothered, or if you feel slightly dead, and when belief seems like a quaint, archaic nonsense? You reckon upon the Lord. When I was preparing this word kept coming to me from Father. And your Father says to you, you reckon upon who I am. So this word reckon kept coming back from Father. And I looked it up. And so its word has its roots in sort of early Dutch and German, apparently. And those good old Dutch and Germans, very efficient, very proper. It's actually quite forensic. And it means to count up. And it's about generating a factual record of items that are received, establishing something as a calculation. So therefore, it's safe to rely upon. If someone gives you a reckoning or there's an account that's been made up, it's safe to rely on it because it's accurate, it's factual. And effectively, it's accounting. It's basically accounting. But we use the word quite differently today. It's quite flippant, and we almost use it as an estimate. So, someone might, toss you a turnip and say, what do you think that weighs in at? And you might go, you reckon that's about 2 moles. And so there's that kind of it's just that estimation. It's that kind of rough idea. But actually, it's something very, very different to that. It's about actually knowing what the facts are and knowing exactly what that thing weighs. It's detailed and factual. So reckoning on the Lord is to look at who he is and what he has done, both in his word and also in our lives and the lives of those around us. That's why testimony is just so wonderful and powerful, because people are sharing testimony of what the Lord has done. And when I sort of talk with friends who aren't believers about this, it always comes as a bit of a shock to them. They're like, what? God does something, he does something in your life. You're like, well, yeah, because I wouldn't follow him otherwise. I mean, I'm not an idiot. I mean, you might as well just, I think I've said this before, you might as well just follow a stone. If God didn't respond, if God didn't speak, if God didn't change and move things, and you didn't have evidence of that, you didn't see that. I think I would question my faith. I don't know about anyone else. I'm just putting that out there. God is real. God lives and works. Testimony is so powerful. It reminds you that God is real, that God is there, that he is working. And it's knowing that he is faithful and just and trustworthy. And it's about choosing to trust that and ultimately him over external circumstances and our own internal experience. Proverbs, a well-known proverb 3, chapter 3, verse 5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Fantastic verse there about an active faith in a living God. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. That takes effort, all your heart. And do not lean on your own understanding. That also takes effort. That's that active faith. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. That's where God comes through. He will make straight your paths. Now, this reckoning upon the Lord, I'm just going to dip into a story from the Bible that illustrates this quite well. And it's a tale of espionage. we're going to drop into the Old Testament, so strap yourselves in. It's Numbers 13, and it's when the 12 spies are sent out by Moses to spy out the promised land and come back with a report on it. So if you want to follow along at home, it's Numbers 13, and I'm going to be starting by looking at verse 17, which is where this is where Moses instructs the 12 spies to go out into the promised land, and he asked them to report certain things. It's actually, some of you know, I had a bit of time in the reserve forces, and this really reminded me actually of an officer's briefing before you went on a patrol or you went on a reconnaissance, which is pretty much what these guys were doing. They were heading out into the land, an unknown land, and Moses wanted a full report of what was in there. So he says, Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, go up into the Negev and go up into the hill country and see what the land is, and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, whether there are trees in it or not. Be of good courage and bring some fruit of the land. So it's quite detailed. You know, Moses is asking very, very practical questions. These are the kind of things I'd want to know if I was considering moving forward into an unknown land. So he's looking at the practical things. You know, are there big armies there? Are there big cities, big fortifications, or is it going to be a walkover? Is the land even good enough to grow things in? Can we survive in there? You know, so it's practical. Moses is interested in the practical. He's got his head screwed on. God is interested in the practical. He knows about the fundamentals of how the world works and what we as people need. God, a life of faith isn't living in La La Land. God doesn't call us to live in La La Land, you know, but he does call us to faith. If he speaks, that goes above all. If he commands, it supersedes anything, regardless if God's command contradicts what you can see before you or what the natural says to you. And we're going to see this in this story of the spies, and the crux comes when they come back and give their report. Verse 26-33. So 12 spies went out, 10 came back with a report, and 2 had a different version of events, Joshua and Caleb, which we're going to speak about in a bit. So they all agreed that the land is good. So they say the land is good, it's full of milk and honey, it does flow, it, you know, indeed it's everything that the Lord promised. But the cities are huge, they're fortifications, the people in there are giants, they're monsters. There is no way we'll be able to go in there. So effectively 10 of the spies say it's perfect in every way, but there's this, this and this, and we cannot go in there. We mustn't go in there, we cannot go in there. We'll never win, we'll never survive. Caleb at this point stands up and he says, no, we can and we should go forward into it. And then the 10 counter with, in verse 31, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. Okay, and then it talks about them spreading a bad report amongst the Israelites. And they say the land devours, we've seen it, the land devours those living in it. Well, that's strange, isn't it? Because a little bit before they were saying, oh, the land flows with milk and honey, it's perfect, it's wonderful. And now suddenly they flip around and they're saying, no, the land, it devours everyone living in it. You see that fear starting to seep in there. You know, they're looking at the natural, the fear starting to seep in, and they're starting to spread that report. And verse 33 I find really insightful. It says, we seemed, this is what the 10 spies said, we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Well, that's a complete assumption, right? Because they were spies walking in this land as enemy agents, effectively, spying out this land. It's not like they walked up and asked the Nephilim, which were these giant people, this giant race of people. And one of the concordances, it says they were abnormally large, which I find quite amusing. But they didn't walk up to them. They were spies. The whole point was that they weren't seen. And they're saying that we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Well, how do they know what they look like to them? They didn't go up to them and say, excuse me, old boy, I'm just wandering around here and I'm starting to feel a little bit puny amongst you all. What do you think I look like? And the Nephilim would have just leant over and gone, like a grasshopper, and just squashed him flat. But so that's not what happened. So here you see how fear works. They're believing just a mere suspicion. They're fearing a mere suspicion. It's not even real. It's a mist, and it's an assumption on their part. It's something that's in their heads. And that's how fear works. It's very pervasive like that. And it spreads, it infects, it magnifies things. And it sucks out faith, it sucks out courage, sucks out boldness. And you can see how amongst the Israelite camp, the fear that those 10 brought back just started to spread, and they effectively, it says, they rebelled against God. They gave into that fear. They threw their hands up and said, we can't do this. We can't do this. Now later, we've got Joshua and Caleb in chapter 14, verses 7-9. And this is just a great demonstration of reckoning upon who the Lord is, all right? So they've been into the land as well. They've seen everything. They've been there, just like those other 10. And now they've got to face the rebelliousness of the Israelite people, who are completely awash with fear and just running riot, thinking, we shouldn't be out here. This is ridiculous. We never should have done this. And here's what they say. The land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. So they reinforce that original message. It's good. It is good. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us. A land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord. Do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Okay? So they saw everything that those 10 spies saw. The difference between Joshua and Caleb and the rest of them is Joshua and Caleb reckoned upon who the Lord was. Okay? Here they account for the Lord. They don't take account of the size or the strength of the obstacles. They didn't look at the Nephilim and say, no, they're way too big. I mean, they saw that they were big, right? I mean, they're not blind, they're not idiots. They saw that, but they didn't take it into account. They accounted for the Lord. Okay? Gideon, David, did exactly the same thing. If you look in the Old Testament, the stories of Gideon and David did exactly the same thing. David in particular, Goliath. David saw Goliath just as he was, a giant guy, an experienced warrior, covered in weapons and armor. He saw that. He didn't, it wasn't, as I was saying about La La Land, he didn't just float along and just be like, all right. He could see that. He knew that. But what he did was he accounted for the Lord that was with him. And he said, the Lord is with us. The Lord will defeat this guy. It still meant David had to go up there. But David knew the Lord was with him, and the Lord would use what David had. What did the Lord say to Gideon? He said, go in the might that you have. Gideon had something. He was a farmer. He was the least of the least, but he had something. And the Lord said, just go in that. I will be with you. Gideon reckoned upon who the Lord was. You see, the Lord loves faith. Reckoning upon the Lord is faith. And he honors and rewards that. And I think the reason why he really loves that is because it just shows that you believe. It's proof, it's evidence that you believe that God is who he says he is. And it gives him an opportunity to show his goodness. Father will invite you constantly to adventure. He will invite you constantly to trust him. But it's always an invite, though. He doesn't invite you and then before you've even answered just kind of like hook you around the back of the neck with one of those crooks and just pull you in. That's not how God works. He will offer you an invitation. But you have to take that step. You have to take that step forward and take God at his word and say yes to the invitation and move forward in that. And then you will see God work. I'm thinking about rewards for faith. I mean, the greatest reward as believers, we believe, is salvation, is eternal life, which is gifted to anyone who chooses to believe in Jesus and gives their life wholeheartedly in faith to him. And then by that faith, that then grows and grows into an ongoing restoration, a fullness of life that starts right here, right now. I mean, Laura's preached last week, wonderful, when she was saying about how salvation isn't just that sort of ticket to heaven. I love that. It's so good to be reminded of that. It isn't that kind of like, oh, I've got my ticket, and then you just sit there and wait for the show to start. Just waiting there bored. Looking at the watch, going, and then and then you die and go to heaven, and I'm here. It's not like that. It's not like that. Laura did such a good job about getting us to focus on that again. Salvation is real. It's ongoing, and it's now, right here, right now. It's the fullness of God in your lived experience on earth right now. And then you will just walk into heaven, just halfway there with all that experience of the goodness of God, just to worship him. It's powerful. And when I was prepping this, I said, Lord, is there anything you want to speak and bring? And he gave me just some specific words, which I'm going to share now. And I sort of felt this wasn't really for anyone in particular. It might impact individuals. Parts of this might impact you, but I really felt this was just general pouring out of the Lord's heart for us as people. And I felt the Lord say, do not shrink back. Do not shrink back. I am not raising a people who fear. Lack of fear will be your witness. Hope will be your trademark. Joy and laughter will resound from your tent, even though you dwell in a land of fear. Courage and boldness will set your boundary. Courage and boldness will set your boundary. Love will be your guard. Love will be your fighter. Love will be your keeper. Love will be your desire. So reckon upon the Lord. Account for him. Don't add up the things that are around you. You know, see them, but see them for what they are, and see God for who he is. Account for the Lord. Account for the Lord. Trust fully in him, and he will make straight your paths. Amen.